Hey, everybody. This is Hank Drake, creator and admin of the Vladimir Horowitz Pianist Facebook page, as well as the Vladimir Horowitz Instagram page, and I'll include the links below. So, today we're going to be talking about this box set from 2013, Vladimir Horowitz at Carnegie Hall. You can see the artwork there, the little airbrushed colorized picture of Horowitz, and then some pictures of Carnegie Hall. So, it's in several sections. First of all, I'll say it comes with a really nice booklet, and the booklet contains some very perceptive essays and also the program documents, of course, and then a lot of pictures, including some newspaper clippings, because, when Horowitz returned to the stage in 1965, it was a big, big deal. And most of the recordings here are unedited, not all of them, and we'll get back to that later. So, and it runs roughly chronologically from 1943 until 1978. So it starts off with the War Bonds concert. This was a concert that Horowitz and Toscanini gave at Carnegie Hall. It was an all Tchaikovsky concert, and $11 million was raised for war bonds. That's $11 million in 1943. That was a lot of money, especially for a classical music event. And then we segue to probably the most interesting part of the set, which is the recordings that were made um, at Horowitz's own expense by the Carnegie Hall Recording Corporation. These span from 1945 to 1950, and some 10 recitals were recorded in addition to a concerto performance of the Brahms Second Piano Concerto with Bruno Walter. Most of these have not been released to this day. Horowitz turned these recordings over to Yale University, where they created a Horowitz Archives in 1986. However, most of them have not been released for various reasons, and I'll get into that. But what we do have here is we have recital from 1949. Includes Bach's Toccata in C minor, non-hyphenated Bach, actual regular Bach played by Horowitz, some Clementi, some Schumann, Chopin's B flat minor sonata, some short pieces, including a couple of Prokofiev pieces, a couple of Debussy etudes, and and then some Liszt, Hungarian Rhapsody number 15 in his own arrangement. In fact, his own arrangement is really more similar to the Berlioz version of the Rakowski March than the Liszt. There's also a February recital, 1949, which has Beethoven's Sonata number 7 in D major, several Kabalevsky preludes, and some short Chopin and Liszt pieces. And then finally, uh, a 1950 recital, which includes, I believe, the New York premiere, but I might be mistaken, of the Barber Sonata. It's not the American premiere. The American premiere, well, actually, the world premiere took place in Havana, Cuba in 1949, and the first American performance was actually right old in good old Cleveland shortly after that. But the New York premiere was a couple of months later. But anyway, what's interesting about these recitals is they really show Horowitz in his prime, pre-retirement prime. And unfortunately, they have not all been released, which they should be. Now, what happened is they were initially released piecemeal as what was called the private collection in the 90s, and that was devoted to pieces that were not otherwise in his recorded repertoire. And we're talking about various Debussy etudes, those Kabalevsky preludes, some Rachmaninoff, and some 20th century music, the Kabalevsky Sonata number 2. What I've been told is at the time, Wanda did not want anything else released. In fact, there were a couple of other pieces in his that were not otherwise recorded by him. Balakirov's Islame and Liszt's for St. Francis Walking on the Water, which she thought were flashy music and not indicative of the kind of music he favored later in his career. Well, yeah, but that's her opinion. But the performances were fantastic and they were released later on. They're not in this set because they were released after this set was issued. What I've been told is that after Wanda died, the control over which recordings would be released reverted to three people. Two of the people are still alive. I'm not going to mention their names. The third person is Byron Janis. He passed away recently, I think earlier this year, and he was the one who put the scotch on releasing the whole complete set of what they call the Yale recitals. Now that he's passed, who knows? Maybe Sony will do it, but I've seen no indication that they plan to. So then after these recitals, You get into some recitals from the early 50s that were recorded by RCA. Um, there is a 1951 recording, March 5th, 1951. And what's interesting about this recital to me is it includes the Mozart Sonata in B flat major K333 that he recorded later in 1987. Now, this is more correct, quote unquote, in terms of the placement of certain ornaments. But I actually like the second performance better, the later performance better. He just seems more into the mood of Mozart. It seems a little bit more relaxed. But also, this has a rocking, powerful Liszt Sixth Rhapsody with some of Horowitz's retouchings. Um, there's also a recording from April 23rd, 1951, and some of these have been released before, including the pictures at an exhibition. This is the complete recital, untouched, including applause, including a beautiful Haydn sonata. Then you have the Silver Jubilee concert where he played the Tchaikovsky concerto. He was originally going to play this with Metropolis, who had to bow out for health reasons, and he wound up recording it with or playing with George Sell. They still don't know which label recorded this, whether it was recorded by Columbia, which is what Zell was with, or RCA, which is what Horowitz was with. But it's an absolutely amazing performance of the Tchaikovsky. I actually prefer it to the Toscanini recordings. He's a bit more relaxed here. He's a bit less straight laced. He's a bit more Horowitz. And at the end, they're not quite together, but Horowitz sounds like he was shot out of a cannon when he does that final octave volley. It's absolutely fantastic. And finally, what has been called by some the burnout recital, his final performance until 1965. Now, what's interesting about this album is this is the first time this has been released without edits. The 1953 Horowitz at Carnegie Hall 25th anniversary album was edited. It was edited from a rehearsal. And it was also they spliced in, they played around with the repeats, and they took out three pieces. They took out Brahms' Rhapsody in E flat major. That's the opening piece on the program, and Horowitz has a couple of baubles there. They took out The Little Shepherd from the Children's Corner Suite, and they also took out one of the encores, the Rondo from a Clementi Sonata, maybe because he had just recently recorded it. I don't know why. There's nothing wrong with the performance, but what I find is actually I find the unedited performances, particularly the Schubert Sonata, to be a bit more convincing. It's a bit less hard edged. It's a bit more of a piece. And I've actually analyzed the performances at this concert, and I will include a link below to that analysis. So for 12 years, he didn't perform publicly. And then in January 1965, he began rehearsing. Now, those January uh, and earlier, prior to May 9th, 1965, rehearsals are now included in another album that was released about 5 years ago. And I've already made a video about that, and I'll include the link. So, this is the unedited version of the 1965 return concert. And now we are in the era of the Columbia concerts. Of course, this also means that we're in the stereo era. And I think it's reasonable to say that they do sound a lot better than the RCA recordings. In fact, these Columbia recordings sound better than the later RCA recordings as well. So after that, about 11 months later, he played another concert. Now, what's interesting about this, the unedited version of this, is he was extremely nervous here. It's almost like he was nervous about being nervous because there's little baubles in even simple pieces like the Mozart Sonata. And the Beethoven 32 variations is parts of it are just kind of messy. And you can just hear he's really just keyed up and tense and not able to relax. It's not until he gets to just before intermission and he plays Scriabin's 10th sonata that he's really on form. Um, and then we have more recitals. We have the 1966, later 1966 recitals from November and December, where the big highlight here is his own arrangement of the Liszt Vallée d'Auburn, and also two radically different performances of Chopin's B flat minor sonata, completely different in the way he plays them. Then we're on to 1967. And the odd part about this program is Beethoven's Sonata in A major, Opus 101. It's one of the very few recordings of Horowitz playing late Beethoven. This is also the only piano sonata of Beethoven's he played after his return in 1965. He played it in 1967 and early 68. He played it in 1980, where unfortunately none of those concerts were professionally recorded. There are pirates. And he played it during his disastrous 1983 season when he was medicated. Um, Following that, we have some interesting things. In 1968, to celebrate the 40th anniversary of his American debut, he agreed to perform on television. It was on the CBS television network. Can you imagine a classical performer on a major television network these days? No. But these include the unedited portions of those two concerts because he played on January 2nd and February 1st, 1968. Those concerts and a rehearsal were spliced together for the Horowitz on Television album, but this is the unedited version, and it's interesting to hear the performance differences. And there are differences between the final concert and the final album because the final concert they had to take into consideration camera angles, but the final album was the edits were picked solely on musical or technical reasons. And then finally, two more Carnegie Hall recitals from 1968. There's November 24th. And the two big pieces on these programs are Schumann's Kreisleriana and Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Sonata in Horowitz's own edition. The Kreisleriana on this first November concert is a mess. He is incredibly nervous. He makes mistakes all over the place. He just feels uncomfortable. He seems uncomfortable, and actually, even Harold Schoenberg, who was very much a Horowitz um, fan, commented on that. And the piano sonata in B flat minor, the interesting part about this one is in the second movement, he has to stop because you can hear the string snaps. He has to stop. Piano tuner comes on stage, takes out the offending string because it's vibrating over the other strings, and he continues the concert. And then December 15th is the same program, but he's a little bit more in league here. He's much more at ease here. And so the Chrysleriana in particular is much more successful. Also, another thing with the December 15th, the encores were missing from Sony's vaults. So the producer found a pirate recording of the encores and remastered them and put them on the set. Finally, we're in the 1970s, and this is where things start to get pretty complicated. So in 1975, he began playing again. He started playing again in 1974, but it was just a few concerts. And then in 1975, he started playing more regularly. So there are a couple of Carnegie Hall performances from November of 1975. And the big piece on these is the Schumann Sonata in F minor. I will tell you bluntly, he's not in good form in these concerts. He's still getting used to playing large tours because he played concerts here and there in the 60s, but here he did a cross country tour. It's the most concerts he'd done since the 50s. And it's a big piece, and he's just not at ease. It really took him until 1976 after he played this piece in concert a number of times where he really began to become comfortable with us. And some of the sound is just overly large. It's like he's trying to sound like the old Horowitz. And when he forces things, he starts to become strained and make mistakes. So honestly, I just don't think these concerts are that great. Although the Chopin B minor scherzo from the November 16th concert, that is pretty spectacular. Then you have the concert of the century. Now, I mentioned that these concerts are mostly unedited. This is an exception. There are slight edits here. And here's what happened Horowitz played a number of pieces here for this concert. None of them as solos. This was a benefit to raise money for Carnegie Hall and included pretty much all the big, gigantic stars who were still performing. Horowitz, Bernstein, Isaac Stern, Rostropovich, and Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau. And Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau has written some really belittling things about Horowitz. But the fact is, the two edits that are in this were not for Horowitz. They were to cover up when Fischer-Dieskau, when his voice cracked. And he made them splice in things from the rehearsal. Uh, then you have the famed or infamous Golden Jubilee concert. This is also edited, and what a source at Sony told me was because I've not heard the unedited version, it's floating around somewhere with the pirates, is that the reason why they could not release the unedited version of this is that there's several parts of the performance where Horowitz and Ormandy simply are not together. And it's just not acceptable. It's not just wrong notes, it's like they're way off. So they decided to keep the edited version of this. And this performance, you know, I used to really wax poetic about this performance, but the truth of the matter is, Horowitz was rusty. There are some great moments in the performance, but overall, his later performances later in the season in Ann Arbor, Michigan, with Ormandy and the Philly Orchestra, and later in New York with Zubin Mehta, which was also videotaped, those performances are far better than this. We have three more discs of odds and ends from those private recitals that didn't fit into the three complete recitals that are also included. And finally, the DVD of the Horowitz at Carnegie Hall video performance from 1968, which is really the only video we have of Horowitz playing in his prime. So, as I said before, this comes with a great booklet. If you can get this at a good price, after these sell out, the prices go through the roof. But if you can find this at a good price and you want to hear mostly pure, unadulterated Horowitz, and mostly in good form, this is a set you should have. Because until Sony releases an absolutely everything complete edition, this is what you got. So, anyway, thanks for listening and take care.